Researchers at the Independent UFO Network and BUFORA travelled the length and breadth of Britain, investigating one of the most elusive branches of the UFO enigma, abductions. Among them was a Philip Mantle, who described his work simply: "Our eventual aim is to study abductions in Britain as they have never been studied before." This is the story of one such case, a story that begins, as many do, in isolation. A winter's night, a solitary figure, and something waiting on the Cambrian coast. The date was February the 8th, 1985. Shortly after 3 o'clock in the morning, a 19-year-old from rural North Wales was walking home along a quiet main road. He'd spent the evening with friends listening to music, and now was covering the 4-mile journey back to his village. The night was starlit, but bitterly cold. Snow lay on the verges from earlier in the week. He knew the road well, and he didn't carry a torch. After some 20 minutes of walking, he noticed a faint humming noise coming from a field. Curious, he turned down a side lane and saw, resting low over the ground, a large, dull, black object hovering in the middle of the field. He estimated it to be 24 to 26 feet in diameter, about 20 feet high, shaped like a dome with no obvious windows or markings, and emitting a soft fluorescent glow. He said it was about the size of 3 standard garages. As he stood transfixed, several humanoid figures emerged from the darkness. "At this point I might have retreated," he later told investigators, "but there must have been another humanoid behind me. He effectively captured me and somehow took me on board." The witness described being led through a drawbridge-like hatchway into the craft. Within, he found himself in a room for about 15 minutes, surrounded by panels and consoles and a single screen on the wall. The interior lighting was diffuse and bluish. The beings, he said, were humanoid but featureless, helmeted, grey-suited, with a gold belt, gold braces, a green buckle, black knee boots and gloves. 2 faint lights marked the place where eyes should have been. Their movements were rapid and stilted, almost robotic. He was seated in a chair and told telepathically to remain calm. They prepared him for what they called time change and decontamination. Then, without any sense of motion or G-force, the craft rose silently into the sky, and on the wall he watched the planets of the solar system pass by, one by one: Jupiter, Saturn, and the distant orbs beyond, until, as he claimed, they passed Pluto and docked with a huge mothership. Inside this larger vessel, the witnesses underwent what appeared to be a medical examination. He recalled a long instrument with the point on the end that burned his arm, leaving marks later shown to investigators. Probes were placed around his neck and chest whilst his heartbeat was monitored. He reported that the beings wished to remove his eyes, but that he was given the choice to refuse, which, naturally, he did. A cassette tape in his pocket was removed, its music analysed by a console that also picked up his thought waves. During what he called a telepathic communication, the beings told him they came from beyond the constellation of Lyra, breathed pure oxygen, and disliked the polluted atmosphere on Earth. They mentioned bases on the moon and claimed that black holes were really force fields around solar systems, and said their scout ship was made from a plastic unknown to man. When the craft finally returned him to Earth, he felt dizzy, as if floating. He saw the UFO withdraw silently into the night and disappear. At approximately 5:30 a.m., a local policeman on patrol found him wandering the road, disoriented, and he was driven home. He'd been missing for about 2.5 hours, for a journey that should have taken little more than 1. 16 days later, on the 24th of February, representatives from Contact International, Derek Mansell, Jeff Ambler and David Ridge, travelled to North Wales. They met the witness and his mother at their home, joined by other family members. Mansell noted that the young man appeared calm and relaxed. He retold his story consistently with his earlier statement. Burn marks on his arm were still faintly visible. The investigators were impressed by his composure. They found no indication of hoaxing or attention-seeking. They were then escorted to the landing site. The field lay on gently undulating land about half a mile from the coast, flat countryside bordered by trees and ditches. It was, the report noted, slightly bumpy and marshy, and not really the best site for a landing. Despite careful inspection, no traces of radiation or physical impressions were found. Yet the geography was curious. Several nearby fields were perfectly level. Unnaturally so, almost like bowling greens, the team observed. Would not these have made better landing sites for an aerial vehicle? A week later, the investigators returned. They spoke again with the family and confirmed that the witness remained withdrawn, but sincere. The Contact International report concluded cautiously, with no witness or related events, the validity of the case rests entirely with the testimony of the witness. The team feels beyond reasonable doubt that the witness experienced something. Months later, Contact International passed the case to Philip Mantle and the Independent UFO Network for renewed examination. Mantle interviewed the witness twice, once with veteran Welsh researcher Margaret Fry, and again alone in the summer of 1986. He described the young man as extremely nervous. Talking about the experience still upsets him. Following the incident and the closure of the original inquiry, the witness had suffered recurring nightmares, eventually seeking medical help and hypnotherapy. The nightmares, he said, have almost completely disappeared now, but return on occasion. The event had changed him profoundly. He'd become deeply interested in green issues. He wrote poetry spontaneously and even composed songs inspired by his experience. When questioned on the physical reality of what had happened, he offered an ambiguous but quite revealing answer. The UFO in the field was physically real, but what took place inside seemed unreal, different in some way. Mantle concluded that this was, in every sense, a typical British abduction. There were no small grey creatures, no genetic experiments, no hypnotic regression, and no American-style narrative of clinical probing. The craft itself was unlike the sleek discs of American reports. It was duller and bulkier, pretty much utilitarian. All of these things added together do make it a typical British abduction case, he wrote. Every culture shapes its mysteries. Where American witnesses speak of metallic corridors and surgical tables, the British abductee of 1985 described something quieter, colder, and less certain. A dream almost that spilled into waking life. Several elements of this case are pretty striking. The psychological footprint. So, unlike some of the flamboyant contactee stories, this witness didn't seek any attention. His first impulse was not to inform the press, but to contact a responsible body, as he put it, Contact International. This suggests a sincere need for validation rather than notoriety. Secondly, the mechanical quality of the beings. They're described not as organic entities, but as robot-like figures, a theme that recurs in numerous British cases of the period, from Runcorn to the Welsh borderlands. In each, the intelligence behind the event appears mediated through machinery, an impression of something technological standing in for the living. And the third is the absence of witnesses, coupled with consistent missing time and psychosomatic effects, burn marks and dizziness and disorientation, features that mirror a cluster of British abduction cases between 83 and 87. The Cambrian coast event sits squarely within that wave. Then there's the content of the communication. This reference to Lyra, references to bases on the moon, black holes being force fields. These claims align not with popular science, but with ideas circulating in fringe literature of the late 1970s, raising the possibility that the experience, though real to the witness, drew its imagery from a shared cultural reservoir of UFO myth. But you can't ignore the verifiable residues, can you? The burn mark, the policeman's unexplained encounter with him, the uniform testimony over several years. When viewed within the broader history of British ufology, the Cambrian coast case stands as a transitional 1. Bridging the mechanical spacecraft encounters of the 70s and the more interior psychological abduction experiences that would dominate the 90s actually. The witness himself seemed to sense this divide in a way, describing the field event as tangible but the interior as dreamlike. And in that distinction lies perhaps a haunting question. If an encounter can be both real and unreal, then what exactly does that say about the frontier between the mind and the cosmos? So whether the young man of North Wales truly travelled beyond Pluto or journeyed into a realm of the mind, we will never know. But one fact remains beyond dispute, that on a frozen morning in February of 1985, he encountered something that changed the course of his life and added one more chapter to the continuing mystery of the unknown.